You're listening to The Jewish Truth Bomb with Lenny Goldberg.
Hi, this is Lenny Goldberg, and thank you for joining me today. What stands behind this ongoing campaign of drafting the Haredi? That's been a running narrative over the last few weeks, the drafting of the Haredi Jews. It's a sensitive issue. The fact that some sons of some Jews go into the army and risk danger to life, while others do not. That's an explosive issue that leads to a lot of bitterness, especially when it's fanned by the professional insiders of the Torah-hating left. But that doesn't mean there's not something to it. Because those who are calling on the Haredi to be drafted, they're the same ones who want to put together a hostage deal that would weaken us. They're the ones who hate Netanyahu. We're talking Yair Lapid, Yair Golan, the newspaper Haaretz. For them, it's just part of their obsessive attack on authentic Jewry. These are the same people, the same groups who have always attacked the ultra-Orthodox, how they dress, how they speak, how they cheat, how they're parasites, how they're aggressive, how they keep to themselves. The same accusations that were dredged up by the Nazis against the Jewish people. It's classic anti-Semitism of the most nauseating kind. But amidst all those lies and defamations and just hate, there is one point that these people have seized upon, which strikes a very responsive chord to many Jews in Israel who aren't anti-religious, Dafka. And that's the question of army service for yeshiva students. Now, there's not the slightest question that the war that Israel's fighting today with the Arabs is a milchemet mitzvah, an obligatory war, a mandatory war. What is a mandatory war? Well, the Rambam says in Hilchot Melachim, the Laws of Kings, chapter 5, the first halacha, he says, what is an obligatory war? The war against the 7 nations, a war against Amalek, and a war to help Israel against an enemy that comes against them. Those are the 3 categories of a milchemet mitzvah. And the Arabs obviously enter the 3rd category, to help Israel against an enemy that comes against them. And for argument's sake, you could say that it's a war against Amalek. The Arabs in many ways fill the biblical shoes of Amalek, but we won't get into that now. And regarding a war against the 7 nations, that can also include the Arabs within Israel, because they possess the same characteristic of the 7 nations, of the Canaanite nations. What's that? The Arabs are similar to the 7 Canaanite nations in the respect that they both believe that Israel is their land, that they're indigenous to it. Because after all, when we got here, they were here, just like the 7 nations were already there when Joshua came to conquer it. And so they'll never come to terms with you because they think it's theirs. But all that's parenthetical. The point I'm making here is that if there was ever a war that was a mandatory war, that's this struggle against the Arabs today in Israel. And therefore, in such a war, according to Halacha, the Rambam brings it down that in an obligatory war, everybody goes out to battle, even the bridegroom from his room and the bride from her canopy. That's in the Laws of Kings, chapter 7. So nobody is exempt from an obligatory war. The only question is, if there are Torah scholars who learn all the time, and that's what they do, there could be an exemption there. But I won't get into that. But you have to understand that the left is using this as a bludgeon against the Haredi Jews who they hate anyway. We have a shortage of manpower in the army. Do you know how many military divisions have been shut down over the recent years because of their crazy mindset that the IDF has to be a tzava katan v'chacham, which means that their vision of the IDF was to be a small and efficient and smart army. So they're the ones who limited the draft over the years and shut down all these other military departments. This is a known thing. The mindset of the IDF is a tzava katan v'chacham, a small army. As crazy as that might sound, how can you have a small army when you're surrounded by enemies who want to kill you all the time? But that's been their view over the last 10 years. Build up the Air Force. You don't need that many tanks. We don't even need that many soldiers. They cut out lots of important divisions because we want a tzava chacham v'katan. We want a smart, high-tech army. That's where the IDF has been going over the last decade. That's one of the reasons we're in so much trouble now, because we're not cut out for the kind of fighting we're having now in Gaza. A smart, efficient army. Tzava chacham vekatan. I'm not making this up. Oh, but suddenly you want those Haredi guys wearing a uniform. That's gonna put us over the top. Not. So I'm not saying it's not problematic that the Haredi Jews don't do the army. Of course it's annoying. But to think that if the Haredi Jews suit up in an IDF uniform, that's going to solve our military problems, that's the lie. But that's how the elites and the anti-Torah Jews like to spin it. Because these are people who don't see any value in Torah learning. They despise Judaism, and they despise the Haredim for representing that. Israel's housing minister, Yitzchak Goldnoff, from United Torah Judaism, he spoke at this gathering in Bnei Brak, and he said that 4,000 Haredim, they wanted to enlist since the beginning of the year. 3,300 of them were ruled out. And so he says, you don't want us, and you don't need us, so why do you abuse us? In any case, like I said, this is a powder keg issue, but I wanted to talk about it from a cultural point of view, because this subject, it's being used in the cultural war that's taking place in Israel. The ultra-Orthodox Haredi Jews, they live according to their ideals, which are different from the secular world. They're not only different from the secular world, they're very different from the national religious Jews. They have a certain ideal they believe in, and they cling to it, and nothing is going to move them from that ideal. No amount of coercion is ever going to break their ideology. And that's what really ticks people off, because they have an ideology that they stick to. You have to understand, the Haredi community, they took it upon themselves to build the Torah world back up, to renew it after it was basically wiped out during the Holocaust. Hundreds of years of Torah learning, yeshivas, were wiped out. So their whole life is self-sacrifice for that ideal, to restore Torah learning. And they're willing to make sacrifices for it. Let's face it, you ever see how they live? They live in poverty, man. They don't live like we do in the settlements. We live in villas. Most of us live in villas. I mean, I'm not talking about the hilltop youth. The regular settler, go to a frat, not just a frat, any settlement, all the settlements around here, Yakir, Nofim, Bruchin, we live like kings. The settler community lives a very comfortable life. They go out to eat. They have restaurants. Every kid has their own bedroom, internet, whatever you want. The Haredi Jews live very, very simply. You got to give them that. Most of them don't go out to eat in restaurants and have extra money for luxuries. Go to Geula or Mea Sharim. They got tons of kids in a couple of rooms with bunk beds. Most of them have no extra money to spend on luxuries. They live very simple lives. You can't take that away from them. And they happen to be the nicest people in Israel. Really, forget about how they look for a minute. Maybe you're not used to it. But let's say you're walking around Geula or Mea Sharim, one of those places, and you're asking for directions how to get somewhere. It's so easy to approach them and ask them things because they're so happy to help you, especially the pious-looking ones with the nice long beards. They'll stop and they'll explain things to you. They really are Amcha. They're grassroots Jews. Okay, they're not nationalists. I get it. They're not Zionists. But you know, there are other parts of Judaism too that the national religious Jews kind of skip over. And so the ultra-Orthodox Haredi Jews, they're the recipients of mockery and hate because they've chosen a life dedicated to Ruach, to spiritual matters. They are a lot less into the material world than we are. Look at their phones. You ever see their phones? They got little phones, no internet. Their kids aren't looking at screens all day long. Their children read real books. Yeah, they're in a bubble, but maybe they're right to be in a bubble. Look how sick the world is out there. You know, right now I'm into my inflatable season. That's what I do for a living. I have bouncy houses and moonwalks, and that's how I make up parnassa. And so this is my time of year, June, July, and August, where you make your money, because that's when the schools book you for all kinds of happenings and stuff like that. So I see the kids. I mean, they're just lined up, not talking to each other. Everybody's looking at his phone during the break. And even when it's not a break, they don't talk to each other. It's not normal. So it's clear that there's something wrong going on with the youth all over the world because of these phones. The Haredi community doesn't have that problem. They don't have a problem of fighting over the remote control of the television. They've dedicated their lives to spiritual matters, so don't knock them. Now, of course, you can point out a lot of the Haredi Jews who are faking it and they're not learning Torah all day. But in our community too, in the religious Zionist camp, there's so many dropouts with us. There are so many dropouts. So many have gone off the derech in our community. So who are we to talk? Just like we have our dropouts, so do they. And so we have to realize something. Today in Israel, we are in the midst of a fierce cultural war. We saw that clearly in the judicial reform debate. You have people who hate the religion, who hate Judaism. And in a war like that, you have to be smart. And you have to distinguish who are your partners in this cultural war. We have a lot more in common with the Haredi Jews than we do with Yair Lapid and Yair Golan and the newspaper Haaretz. A lot more in common. Yeah, we have a dispute concerning national issues, but everything else we have in common with them. Torah, Shabbat, proudly passing on our heritage to the next generation. We have a lot more in common than we don't have in common. And we have a lot more in common with them than we have with some secular Jew who might be a nationalist. And so think about that during this period of Haredi bashing, because I'll tell you something, when it comes to educating your children, if you want them to love Judaism and appreciate Judaism, don't go trashing the Haredi Jews, because your kids will eventually go off the derech, because in a certain way, those Haredi ultra-Orthodox Jews represent Judaism. So if you put them down, it's going to transmit a negative message about Judaism in general, because whether you like it or not, they represent that in many respects. You have to be careful about that, because I've seen that in a lot of homes. And it's the same thing with rabbis you might not agree with. When my kids were little, and I was a big follower of Rabbi Kahana, and I was very disappointed in other rabbis who weren't saying the truth, or maybe were disparaging Rabbi Kahana, saying bad things about him, or maybe they agreed with the rabbi but didn't have the courage to admit it publicly. I tried to be very careful, and sometimes it wasn't easy, not to put down these rabbis in front of my kids. And believe me, there were things that Rav Aviner said, or Rav Avadia Yosef said, my Yeshuv rabbi would say, that just turned me off, and I knew it was just wrong. But I'd never let that seep into the house. Because let's say the rabbi of my community, he says things I don't agree with. He says things that I think are wrong. Let's say his shkaf is not like mine. I don't agree with a lot what he says. You don't want that negativity in your house, negativity about rabbis, negativity about the ultra-Orthodox. That's going to seep into the souls of your kids. And in the end, they won't have respect, not for Judaism, not for any rabbis. And Rabbi Kahana himself, with all the criticism he had to suffer from other rabbis who didn't have the respect for him that he had for them, he never said anything negative about other rabbis. He may have shown disappointment. That's the most he would show, disappointment in rabbis who didn't agree with him. But he never put him down like they put him down, because he had respect for Torah. Moving on to something else, there's a lot of meetings and conventions going on the last few weeks. There was something called Lo Lachzor Le'oto Nekuda. Let's not go back to where we started from. All these campaigns by the national religious community to win this war in Gaza. There's the movement Nachalah, who organizes some of these conventions, and the idea is to resettle Gaza with Jews. And when you hear the speeches, though, how is this going to be done? Nobody really gets to the tachlis of how to do it. There's all kinds of ideas, how many forces we should leave in Gaza, if we should rule over the Philadelphia corridor, or how we can not rule over it, but still remain in Gaza. Everybody's talking roundabout and not getting down to the solution. We have to realize, as long as there are 1 million Arabs in Gaza, or 1.5 million Arabs in Gaza, there won't be settlements in that area. Not only there won't be little settlements, or kibbutzim, and places like Nachalos, you're not going to have a Sderot and an Netivot either, because Gaza is a terror state. Not the Hamas. It's the citizens. They're the Hamas. Remember, Gaza is a terror state that represents the Arab world, and they succeeded in doing something that no Arab nation ever did to us. October 7th was the fulfillment of the Arab dream, and they were able to pull it off. What Egypt and Syria and all our enemies couldn't do, they did. And so we're fighting against an ideology, a vision. And as long as you have 1 million or 2 million Arabs living there, you are enslaved to that reality, and there's nothing you can do. And so you have to have a humanitarian solution, just like you have humanitarian aid. There is one humanitarian solution, and that is emigration. Hey, Canada is ready to take in 5,000 families, or 500 families, I don't remember. Hey, that's a start. Gaza has to be emptied out. That is the only way to bring the Hamas to its knees. If there are no Arabs in Gaza, there's no Hamas. That's the humanitarian answer. Emigration. That's what has to be encouraged. And Gaza is really no different than the rest of Israel and the problem of the Arabs inside Israel. There has to be separation. There's no such thing as Gaza and Israel. It's either Gaza or Israel. The same thing with the rest of the Arabs. It's either them or us. Any other solution isn't a solution. And again, that's the humanitarian way. The Torah is the most humane. It says that we have to separate. You have to drive out the inhabitants of the land. Because the Torah knows if you don't do it, you're going to be beating them. You're going to be like some British imperialist, hitting them, shooting them. They'll shoot us. We'll shoot them. We can't live together. And so the Torah is saying, separate. And so the Torah gives the humanitarian solution to this. Israel's for the Jewish people, and the Arabs have to live in Arab lands. That's how you avoid conflict and strife. Anyway, here's Rabbi Kahana speaking about this back in 1985. We're talking 2 years before the Intifada. At this time, the rabbi was in the Knesset in 1985, and he's speaking here before the Jewish community on this issue. So listen.
Every Jew who has been murdered in the state of Israel because Jews said, well, we can't throw the Arabs out. Every one of those Jews that was murdered, the blood of that Jew is on the heads of every other Jew who said, we can't throw the Arabs out. We had pity on the cruel. We had mercy on the cruel. We were cruel onto innocent people. What has to be done? First of all, what has to be done is we have to throw the Arabs out of the country. When the Talmud tells us, go, if one comes to slay you, slay him first, I'm moderate. I say if one comes to slay you, throw him out first. Because I'm basically moderate. I'm not an extremist like the rabbis of the Talmud. Not for nothing does my support in Israel come from Sephardic Jews. They are the last of the sane Jews. They're untouched by college professors. They're normal people. They lived under Arabs. They know what Arabs are. They don't learn about Arabs in some seminar. They know what Arabs are. They lived under them, and they never again want to live under them again. Never, never. And he knows the great lesson that they understand one thing only, and that is strength. That's what they understand. Strength. I want the Arabs out. I wish them well. I don't wish them ill at all. I wish the Arabs long years of happiness, wealth, and success elsewhere. I don't hate Arabs. I love Jews. I'm not going to see Jews killed because of a misplaced, misguided, insane, corrupted, perverted sense of ethics, which is not ethics, but precisely the opposite. I want an exchange of population. Beginning in 1948, we took in 800,000 Jews who fled Arab countries. 800,000 Jews fled from Iraq to Morocco. They left behind every penny. That was phase one. We took in the Jews. Now we've come to phase two. We took in the Jews, now let's give them the Arabs. An exchange of population. What's so terrible about it?
There's nothing terrible at all about it. What's terrible is that we didn't do it. Anyway, that was Rabbi Meir Kahana, who saw everything so clearly, but most importantly, he gave answers. A lot of people will tell you what the problem is, but they don't have any solutions. They just kvetch all day. The rabbi gave answers, as difficult as they may be, because it's a difficult situation. And the real reason that we had the Oslo Accords and all these other withdrawals is because there really is no other answer but separation. And Shimon Peres, he would always say the same thing to the right. He would say, Ma alternativa shalcha? What's your alternative? In other words, the right is complaining about these withdrawals, about the Oslo Accords, but he would say, but what's your alternative? And the fact is the right doesn't have one, unless you are willing to embrace what Rabbi Kahana had the guts to propose. As you may know, I have a Bible shiur, which you can check out by Googling Lenny Goldberg's Bible Classes. It's a podcast on Spotify and other platforms. And I'm always explaining the importance of learning Bible properly, because the Bible is our story. It's the story of the Jewish people. It's the story of the Jew before the exile messed him up. And I want to bring now another reason. why Bible study is so important. I want to bring the words of the Ramchal, who was Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. He was one of the great rabbis of all times, the author of Mesilat Yesharim and Derech Hashem and other classics. And he was from Italy, eventually went to Amsterdam to write. And he lived in the 1700s. And he eventually made Aliyah to Israel, but he died sadly in a plague. Anyway, in one of his greatest books, it's called Derech Hashem, The Way of God, he explains how getting close to God is the reason we are put on this earth, to cling to Hashem. And one of the ways, he says, to cling to God is by learning his Bible. And so I'm going to read a couple of sentences from the Ramchal, from his book Derech Hashem, regarding the unique power of Torah learning. And this is what he writes. God granted us one particular means which can bring man close to God more than anything else. And this is the study of his revealed Torah. Such study accomplishes this in two ways. First, through the reading of it, and secondly, through its comprehension. So the Ramchal is saying just the very reading of the Bible is going to bring you closer to Hashem, and understanding what is written, the more you understand it, the closer you get to Hashem. I continue to read the words of the Ramchal. In his love, God composed a volume of words decreed by his wisdom and bestowed it upon us. This is the Torah, and later the words of the prophets, making up the Bible as we know it. These words have the unique property of causing one who reads them to incorporate in himself the highest excellence and greatest perfection. The only condition is that they be read with holiness and purity, with the proper intent of fulfilling God's will. So the Ramchal is saying here that it's not enough to just read it, like somebody reads a nice piece of literature or Shakespeare. No, you read it understanding that it's holy and it's God's word. You have a certain awe when you read it. That's the problem, by the way, when they learn in Israel, for Bagrut, to get a diploma, a high school diploma, they have to pass Tanakh, and it becomes learning material. And when the Bible becomes material that you have to learn for a test, it loses its kedusha, its holiness a little bit. It has to be learned, like the Ramchal says, with holiness and purity, that just looking at the Tanakh and just holding it has an effect on you. And I'll read a little bit more what he says. Similarly, when one strives to understand these works, that is, not just read it, but understand it, either through his own intellect or through the explanations provided in their commentaries, he can earn even greater perfection according to his effort. That is, the more you make an effort, the greater perfection you'll achieve. This is even more true when one attains a grasp of the secrets and mysteries contained in these works. Through all these acts, that is, by learning the Tanakh and understanding it, man not only earns excellence and perfection for himself, but he also elevates and perfects the entire fabric of creation. And so the Ramchal is explaining here the importance of learning Tanakh, how it elevates the person reading it, and it elevates the entire world. So on that note, don't forget to listen to my Bible classes, Lenny Goldberg's Bible classes. You can hook up to it on my website at lennygoldberg.com, or just Google Lenny Goldberg's Bible classes. That's it for me. Until next time.